I'm so glad you could be here for another Todd Talk. We take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. So today is another in a series of videos on public speaking. Today, what I'm going to be talking about is how to use your hands in public speaking. And you might be wondering, why is he talking about using your hands in public speaking? It's public speaking. It's not public hands. We don't use jazz hands in public speaking, do we? But the reality is that the speaking part of public speaking only accounts for a certain part of that communication. In fact, the words that are spoken only account for about 15% of the communication that you have with an audience. The other 85% comes in how you say those words. So the inflection, the emotion, things like that. But they're also what are called nonverbals. So nonverbals are the way that you make eye contact, how you stand on the stage, how you move on the stage, and also your hands, how you use your hands when you're speaking. So these communicate a lot of things as well. And so you want to make sure that when you're using your hands, they're communicating what your speech is communicating. So if you don't use your hands very well, and they're not communicating what your speech is communicating, you're actually countering what it is that you're trying to say to the audience. So it is important that you're aware of your hands and that you're using them in a way that helps you to accent or to make better the speech that you are giving and the communication that you're giving to the audience. So first I want to talk about the don'ts that you have with your hands. So there are three don'ts of what you do with your hands during a speech. So the first of these don'ts is when you're out on the stage and you're in front of an audience, you feel very vulnerable. That's a very natural feeling. And so you also feel vulnerable, especially if you don't have a podium or something in front of you. You're just out there in the open. You feel very exposed and you don't quite know where to put your hands. So we want to put our hands in a place that we feel safe. And one of those places is our pockets. So we tend to want to put our hands in our pockets because we feel safe there. So resist this urge. This is our first no-no. So don't put your hands in your pockets because in essence, you're muffling your hands. You're putting them in your pockets and you're preventing them from being used because they're in your pockets. Or if you want to use them, you got to pull them out of your pockets before you use them. So resist the urge. Some people will put one hand in their pocket. Just keep them both out of your pockets at all times when you're giving a speech because that way you have them ready to use when you need to use them. So that's number one. Number two no-no is so we still don't, if we don't put them in our pockets, we still don't quite know what to do with them. So we put them behind our back. So we might hold them behind our back like this. It allows us to stand up straight, which is really good when we're speaking. But again, it also puts our hands far away from the action. When we want to use our hands, we now have to pull them in front and then use them. So it's a big movement if we're going to use them. So why not just keep your hands in front, out of your pockets, and when you go to use your hands, it's an easy movement to use them. So don't put them behind your back, keep them out front. The third no-no when it comes to your hands is because you have the audience staring at you, you sometimes want to put this barrier between you and them just for comfort's sake. And what that barrier looks like is crossing your arms like this. And sometimes you do it just because the venue is cold. I've presented in lots of places that were really, really cold, and you cross your arms merely to keep warm. Resist this urge to cross your arms because it literally puts a barrier between you and the audience. And you don't want that barrier there. You're trying to connect to your audience. So you want to keep your body open to them so that when you're speaking to them, it's freely and they have access to you so that the connection can be made. So again, the three things is don't put your hands in your pockets, don't put them behind your back, and don't fold them in front of you. A couple other things to avoid is if you're not in the open like I am right now. So let's say that you have a podium like this. So resist the urge to kind of like lean on the podium. And because again, this takes your hands away because you're leaning on them, or to put your hands on the podium like this, like you're being arrested and they're have you putting your hands. So you like put the hands in front of you again so you can use them. Although we'll talk about how to stand. If you do have a podium, I recommend, you get out from behind that podium, but we'll talk about that in another Todd Talk. Some other don'ts is if you have a pen with you. Sometimes the inclination is when you have a pen is you want to play with it. I always like to click my pens when I have them in my hands. So when I speak, I get rid of the pens. I don't have them. Some people want to hold a piece of paper, like they may have their notes and they have these and they're just playing with the paper and it's crumpling and it becomes a distraction because they're talking and they're just like folding it and doing all sorts of nervous things with them. So I just don't have paper in my hand when I'm speaking. I avoid that temptation. Now, if you don't have that problem and you can hold the piece of paper and it's not a problem, that's fine. But again, when you're talking, do you want that piece of paper like flipping around or do you want just your hands? So these are some other things to think about when it comes to using your hands. Do you want to have your hands free? So what do you do with your hands? That's what we're going to talk about next. And so some things to think about is what is your neutral position when it comes to your hands? In other words, where will you keep your hands when you're not using them? So I think the best neutral position is kind of here in front of you, kind of by your belly button, above your waist, so that when you go to use your hands, you can simply use them. You definitely don't want them high because you don't want to block your face or your mouth. You want them here kind of around your chest area. So if you have them at your belly button, you can simply use them here. And that way that you have ready access to them. So this is kind of my neutral position. You can hold them in a few ways. I like to hold them in interlocking. I like to interlock my fingers like this and hold them like this. Some people like to have it in a steeple, which is like this, which their fingers touching like this. And then when they go to speak, they just have to open their hands. That's very easy. Another one that people have is they may put one hand in the other like this. And and then they just open their hands whenever. You do whatever is comfortable for you. Now, this in front of you might feel uncomfortable at first because it's kind of an unnatural position for some. So you'll have to get used to this, coming to this center position. This is very natural for me now. I've done enough public speaking where coming back to this neutral position is very, very comfortable for me. But for some people, holding your arms up and putting them in the center position, this neutral position, will feel uncomfortable. So do it enough in your practicing of your speech that you become comfortable with it. And so that coming to this neutral position just feels natural. And again, the reason for this is that when you go to use your hands, it's easy to use them. So when you don't have this neutral position, how do you use your hands? And so I want you to think of yourself like the conductor of a symphony. So a conductor of a symphony, their job is to control the pace of the symphony. So the symphony's playing the music, and the conductor has the music in front of them, and they're controlling the pace of the music being played. The same goes with your hands, and the symphony is actually the words that you're speaking. So you want your hands to reflect the pace of what you're saying. So you can see with some of the ways I'm speaking that my hands kind of go with the rhythm and the speaking that I'm doing. What you don't see is I'm going like fast like this, even though I'm not talking that fast. So if I'm talking this pace, my hand is going that pace. If I were talking really fast and doing like this, my hands may go a little bit faster. So think of yourself as the conductor to a symphony, and your hands are going to reflect the pace that you're going at. Of course, you never want to go too fast in a speech, but if you get excited, you might go a little bit faster with your speech, and your hands are going to reflect that. But if you're talking about something really serious, you might slow it down in order for people to understand that, and your hands will want to reflect this. When you're using your hands, you want to use your hands to enhance what you're saying. But you want to be careful. You don't want to overuse your hands. An easy place to use your hands is when you're counting off things. So you've already seen me use this as an example. When I talked about the 3 things you don't do, I used my fingers to indicate 3, and then I counted off 1, 2, and then 3. So that's one thing you could do. If you're talking about things that naturally come, like if you're talking about your heart, you might talk about that. Or if you're talking about you're mad about something, you can show that. Or if you're happy, you can show joy. But you don't want to mime everything. You don't want to be like, well, I walked down the street and then I opened a door and then I went and I talked to my friend. You're not miming the entire speech. So make sure you're not overdoing it. Like most things with public speaking, there is kind of a Goldilocks point. You don't want to be too much. You don't want to be too little. You want to be just right. So how do we use those hands enough where people are noticing them, but not so much that they become a distraction? Because if you use them too much, then that's all people are going to notice, and they're not going to hear your words at all. I often have to tell my students when we're watching a TED Talk, like, pay attention to the hands, because they're not even seeing them, because the hands are being used in a way that's so subtle that they're not paying attention to them. But the hands are enhancing what is being said. But what you don't want to be is you don't want to be a dead arm. You don't just be sitting here talking like this, like a floating head, just talking without moving your hands at all, because that's not real. There's no movement going on. And as a result, it becomes very static and it's not very engaging. So you want to be moving your hands, because now you want to be moving around the stage as well when you have a face to face. But sometimes, like I'm doing this video, I don't have the opportunity to move around. So my hands become the only movement that I have. So I definitely want to use my hands a lot in this case. How else can you use your hands? Well, so if you have your hands in this neutral position and you're talking, you're making a point, you can open your hands a little bit. So this is called the basketball. So you kind of imagine like you're holding a basketball. So you're making a point, and I want to talk about this. You kind of open your hands to open them up a little bit. Or if you're talking about something really, so the other day, and you open them up even wider when you're talking about something even more important. But you can use your hands in various ways to express what you're talking about. And again, the point is to enhance what you're talking about. What you don't want to do is you don't want to use your hands for the sake of using your hands. So, how do you figure out how to use your hands? Well, some people just naturally use their hands often when they talk. And so, if you're one of those people, this won't be a problem for you. You'll just get up and you'll talk like you often talk. You'll use your hands. If you're a person that doesn't use their hands a lot when they talk, this might be a little more difficult. So one thing you can do is go to your speech and look through your speech for natural places to use your hands. So if you are counting off something, make a note. You might want to use your hands here. If you have a part where you're making an important point, you might want to use your hands. Like, I want to make this really important point. And that way people are focusing in on that point because you've drawn their attention with your hand. So you want to make sure that you are looking for spots, not littered with spots, but just certain spots where hand motion might be appropriate. I had a student once, he was trying hand motions, and he just put them in anywhere randomly. Again, it became a distraction. You only want to put hand motions in where they're appropriate and only when they're enhancing what you're talking about. So you want them to kind of convey the emotion, convey the feeling that you're trying to put out in your speech. You don't want it to become a distraction. Now, there are times when you're using your hands where you kind of are encumbered in your hands just by the venue alone. So, for example, when you go to give a speech, sometimes you'll be given a microphone. And so you have this microphone in one hand. And this hand becomes kind of useless as a result because you have to hold that microphone in front of you. You only have the one hand. So what you want to do is you do want to use this hand like you would have used the other hand. You're not using it double as much as you would. You don't want to double up on this hand because you only have use of one hand, but you still want to use it. You don't want to, when you're speaking in this microphone, you're still using it, you're still making your points, you're still counting off, whatever. You're still using the hands for your hand motions. Other times, like say you have a PowerPoint clicker, you have this clicker. The good news is when you have something like this, you can still use this. Just because it's in your hand doesn't mean that you can't use your hands. So if I'm talking about something over here, I can still draw attention. I can still use this hand as part of my motions. And sometimes if I'm not going to be using the clicker for a little while, I might use the clicker, start talking about something, and I might slip it into my pocket. Don't put my hand in there, of course, but I slip that in my pocket. Then I continue to talk with my hands. And then when I'm going to use my clicker again, I just slide my hand into the pocket and pull the clicker out, and I'm able to use it again. 3 takeaways I'd like you to take from this Todd Talk are this. Number 1, make sure you use your hands. If you don't use your hands, you're taking away a part of the communication that you have with the audience. And you want to have as much communication as possible with them. So using your hands is just another form of communication that allows you to reach your audience, which is what you want to do with your speech. Number 2, what you don't want to overuse your hands. So you don't want the hands to become a distraction. So make sure you find out ways to use your hands that are going to be enhancing but not distracting. And to get some feedback on that, you might want to ask someone to watch your speech and to make sure, because you can't always see yourself. So to give you some feedback on if you're using your hands well, you might want to record yourself and see how you're using your hands. You might want to watch other people and give TED Talks, because when they give TED Talks, almost everyone who gives the TED Talk has excellent body language, and they use their hands very, very well. So watch them as exemplars that can show you how to use your hands very well. So that's number 2. And number 3, make sure that you use the hand gestures in an organic way. You don't want to use the hand gestures unnaturally. You don't just want to throw them in for the sake of throwing them in. So if you're talking about something and then just moving your hands randomly, that is not going to fit in with what you're talking about. So the hand gestures should match what you're saying. They should communicate what you're trying to communicate. They should add to what you're saying. So you want to make sure that you are figuring out ways that you can organically use your hands rather than just trying to fit them in for the sake of fitting them in.